Breathless little girl was raffled off in town square, but a childless rancher won the ticket just to take her to the doctor. Dust and gunpowder still floated in the morning sunlight when Nathaniel Brooks slid from his saddle and knelt beside the fallen stranger. A single gunshot echoed off the shuttered storefront seconds earlier, scattering chickens and sending townsfolk ducking behind whiskey crates. Now the street was silent, broken only by the ragged breath of the wounded man clutching a blood-slicked telegram. Nathaniel pressed a calloused hand to the bullet hole, feeling warm life slipping through his fingers, but the stranger's eyes burned with purpose. "They're raffling her off," he rasped. "Little girl, tonight, don't let him." The words dissolved into a violent cough. Nathaniel eased him to the dirt, scanning the telegram's blurred ink. A name leaped out: Emma Calder. Age 9. Prize livestock show and evening raffle, Redemption Creek Saloon, sundown. Sheriff Hale finally emerged from behind the barber pole, holstering his revolver with an apologetic shrug. "Misunderstanding," he muttered, already turning away. Nathaniel stared after him, anger coiling tighter than the lariat on his saddle horn. Misunderstanding. As though a bullet in a stranger's belly were a spilled drink. Nathaniel folded the telegram, slipped it into his vest, and lifted the stranger to the porch shade. He fetched water, but the man's gaze had already settled on something distant, beyond the red mesas. With a final shuddering breath, he went still. By dusk, the saloon windows burned golden against a violet sky. Inside, laughter thundered above a battered piano. Posters nailed to cedar beams promised whiskey, poker, and the chance to win an angel. Lanterns threw halos over a makeshift stage where a thin, pale girl stood in a blue calico dress 2 sizes too large. Emma's chest rose unevenly. Each breath seemed borrowed at steep interest. Yet her eyes searched the room with quiet defiance, refusing to be anyone's pity prize. Nathaniel pushed through the crowd of ranch hands and prospectors. He smelled horses, sweat, and desperation. The saloon keeper, Silas Pike, grinned beneath a waxed mustache, rattling a tin bucket stuffed with crumpled tickets. "Gentlemen, fate favors the generous," Pike announced. "Every coin buys the chance to save a child, and perhaps your own soul." The men roared, coins clinked, and Nathaniel felt bile rise. Since the stillborn winter 5 years earlier, he had buried the hope of fatherhood beneath acres of dust and cattle chores. Yet Emma's labored breaths pierced that burial mound like spring rain. He reached for his wallet, finding only enough for one ticket. One chance. He dropped the silver into Pike's bucket. The saloon keeper winked, as though complicit in a grand benevolence. Midnight approached. Oil lamps sputtered. Pike swirled the bucket and drew the winning stub. "Ticket 17, he crowed. Nathaniel unfolded his single stub, the inked number shining back at him like providence. A hush fell. He stepped onto the stage. Emma's shoulders stiffened, prepared for another transaction of sympathy. Nathaniel removed his hat. "My name's Nathaniel Brooks," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I'm talking the girl to a doctor in Santa Fe at first light." A murmur rippled. Someone cursed under his breath about charitable fools. Pike's smile faltered. "Now hold, friend. She's scheduled for exhibition tomorrow. Folks paid good money." "Keep the money," Nathaniel answered. "The raffle's over." Emma's thin hand slipped into his. Warm, trusting, more terrifying than any Comanche raid or cattle stampede he'd faced. Outside, the desert night breathed cold sage. Nathaniel lifted Emma onto his horse, wrapped her in his duster, and swung into the saddle behind her. As they rode past the darkened storefronts, a window curtain twitched. Silas Pike watched, eyes gleaming like a coyote denied its kill. Wind rushed over the plain. Emma leaned back against Nathaniel's chest, speaking for the first time, her voice no louder than a moth's wings. "Why'd you do it?" He considered the question, staring at the endless rim of stars. "Because no child belongs on a stage," he said. "And God help anyone who tries to put you back there." Far behind them, Redemption Creek's lone church bell tolled midnight. Or perhaps it was a warning. Nothing in the desert stays buried for long, least of all a man's sins, or a stranger's dying wish scrawled on a blood-stained telegram. Sunrise bled over the Sangre de Cristo range when Nathaniel reined in at the Pecos crossing. Frost crusted the tall grass, and Emma shivered inside his wool coat, each breath a faint whistle that stabbed his conscience. The physician in Santa Fe lay 2 days' ride ahead, but behind them rode a man who treated children like poker chips. Nathaniel scanned the empty horizon. No dust plume yet, though he trusted his instincts more than the stillness. A man like Silas Pike would not surrender profitable merchandise without a fight. They forded the river where it fanned into silver tongues around boulders. Midstream, Emma tightened her grip on the saddle horn, breathing hard, eyes wide at the icy spray that licked her boots. Nathaniel muttered gentle encouragement he barely heard himself. On the far bank, she sagged against his chest, exhausted by the simple act of staying alive. They pressed south until the sun climbed high. Cottonwoods rattled like bones in the wind, and distant thunderheads massed over red mesas. Mid-afternoon, they reached a weather-warped stage station long abandoned after the railroad stole its purpose. Nathaniel tied the horse inside the skeletal barn, laid Emma on a blanket of horsehair and prairie hay, and rummaged through his saddlebags for the tiny vial Doc Clemens had once given him, laudanum for weak lungs, and used since his wife's final night. He measured 3 drops into the canteen cap and coaxed it between Emma's cracked lips. The medicine dimmed the panic in her eyes, but he knew it bought only hours. Storm clouds gathered. Nathaniel stepped outside and felt the air heavy with iron. He headed for the rain barrel to refill the canteen and froze at fresh hoofprints stamped in the mud. Wide hooves shot, for riders maybe, turning in a circle before heading west. He crouched, fingertips grazing the prints, ticking off details the way a rancher reads brands. No more than an hour old. Pike had wasted no time. Inside the barn, Emma slept fitfully, coughing in her dreams. Nathaniel pulled his Winchester from the saddle scabbard, checked the action, then unfolded the stranger's blood-stained telegram he still carried. The ink had run where the man's life had seeped out, but 3 lines remained clear enough to read. Raffle proceeds fund silver shipment. Pass through Galina's Canyon Friday. Stop this, or more children follow. The words felt heavier than the rifle. Pike's cruelty was not an isolated indulgence. It was enterprise. Children dangled as bait to pack his saloon and launder money for men further up the food chain. Nathaniel's quest to save one girl suddenly hung upon deeper stakes. Yet the child in the barn needed breath, not crusades. He folded the paper once more and slid it inside the band of his hat. The first raindrops slapped dust into clay. Nathaniel saddled up, cradled Emma before him, and steered east into the gathering storm. Lightning forked behind them, silhouetting a quartet of riders cresting the ridge in pursuit. Bullets cracked through the rain. Nathaniel spurred the gelding down a gulch choked with scrub oak, hooves throwing sparks against hidden rock. He felt Emma jolt with every stride, her breaths now wheezes. He whispered apology into her hair and promised the horse an extra oat ration if they lived to see one. The gulch narrowed to a box canyon. Dead end. Rain sheeted across the sandstone walls and pooled at their feet. Emma's eyelids fluttered. Nathaniel slid from the saddle and hauled a fallen juniper to block the mouth of the ravine, then crouched behind its twisted trunk, Winchester braced on a knot. Pike's men reined up, revolvers drawn. Their leader, a barrel-chested man with a red bandana, called out over the storm, voice oily. Hand over the investment, rancher. The boss says the show goes on. Thunder rolled. Nathaniel chambered around. His voice carried flat and cold. The show's closed. Ride home while you still can. The response was gunfire. Splinters flew. A slug creased Nathaniel's hat brim. He breathed slow, sighted on muzzle flash, and fired. The bandana man toppled, screaming. The others scattered for cover as the storm intensified, turning the canyon floor into red slurry. Lightning's white flare revealed faces pinched with doubt. Pike paid in coin, not loyalty. Another crack, another rider fell. The remaining 2 spurred out, hooves splashing, retreating into sheets of rain. Nathaniel held his aim until the sound faded, then sagged against the juniper, chest heaving. Emma moaned. He knelt, wiping mud from her cheek. Fever warmed her skin despite the cold rain. When the storm relented near dawn, Nathaniel built a small fire beneath an overhang, its smoke creeping upward like fragile prayer. Emma sipped weak coffee laced with honey from his rations. She managed a wan smile. Did we win, mister? He stroked tangled strands of her hair. We're still breathing. That counts. She considered this, then asked what lay in Santa Fe. He told her of a doctor who owned a contraption, part stethoscope, part bellows, that taught weak lungs to grow stronger. He painted pictures of apple orchards beyond the city where the air smelled sweet, of schoolrooms with slate boards and laughter. With each word, Emma's eyelids drifted until she slept again, face slack, breathing shallow but steady. Nathaniel's own eyes refused rest. He thought of the telegram, of Pike, of unknown men awaiting silver in Galina's canyon. He reckoned two truths. First, Pike would come himself now, driven by greed and wounded ego. Second, the fastest route to Santa Fe skirted that very canyon. Fate had drawn the lines. All that remained was to ride them. They broke camp at first light. The gelding picked its way along high ridges where yucca spears tore at Nathaniel's boots. Midday sun baked the mud to brittle plates that cracked beneath the horse's hooves. Emma dozed in his arms, the laudanum supply nearly spent. At a shallow arroyo he dismounted to let the animal drink, and there on the far bank shimmered the mirage of a stagecoach. Only when the driver waved did Nathaniel believe his luck. The coach belonged to the territorial mail, its canvas torn but its heart still beating westward. Inside sat a lone passenger, Sister Magdalene, a gray-eyed nun bound for the Santa Fe orphanage. She listened as Nathaniel poured out the tale between lurching wheels, her rosary beads clicking not in judgment, but resolve. By the time the coach rattled into Galina's canyon, they had devised a plan balanced precariously between desperation and faith. The canyon walls rose like fortress ramparts. Shadows pooled in crevices where outlaws could roost unseen. The coach driver snapped the reins, anxious to clear the narrows before dusk. Around the final bend, a barricade of freight wagons blocked the pass. 20 armed men lounged beside crates stamped with a smelter's mark. Silas Pike stood among them, mustache drooping wet with sweat, eyes alight at the sight of the approaching coach. Nathaniel felt Emma tremble. He eased her deeper into the bench cushions and whispered the signal. Sister Magdalene nodded, slipped from the opposite door, and melted into the rocks, skirts swishing like ghost wings. Pike swaggered to the coach, palm resting on his pistol. Didn't figure you for the foolhardy type, Brooks. Hand over the girl and ride on. Nathaniel stepped onto the road, hands empty. You lost your wager in Redemption Creek. Let it be. Pike spat. Behind him men shifted, rifles uncocked in lazy confidence. Nathaniel glanced skyward. No one looked up. A pity. They might have admired the flash of a kerosene lamp as Sister Magdalene swung it high above a crate of dynamite on the bluff. The lamp shattered, flame-kissing powder. A roar split the canyon. Rock and dust erupted, toppling wagons, scattering men like rag dolls. Nathaniel dove beneath the coach as shards of timber rained down. When he scrambled out, ears ringing, chaos reigned. Pike crawled on hands and knees, jacket aflame. Nathaniel kicked the gun from his grasp. You burned children's hope for profit, he growled. Today the fire answers. He dragged Pike clear of the debris, doused the flames, then bound his wrists with the man's own belt. The surviving guards threw down weapons, eyeing the canyon exits now blocked by rubble. Sister Magdalene emerged, habit dust-streaked, rosary swinging. Help me gather the wounded, she commanded, and not a soul disobeyed. By nightfall the territorial marshal arrived, summoned by smoke seen miles away. Testimony came easy. The telegram served as scripture. Pike and his men rode east in irons. The silver shipment became evidence. The raffle scheme cracked open like a rotten nut, exposing names of buyers who would never sleep sound again. 2 days later the coach clattered into Santa Fe. The doctor received Emma under the convent's copper-roofed infirmary. He listened to her chest, adjusted the bellows contraption, and spoke reassuring words Nathaniel scarcely heard, his gaze fixed on the rise and fall of the child's ribs, each breath a fragile miracle. Weeks passed. Autumn hinted at aspens turning gold in the mountains when Emma walked unassisted into the orphanage courtyard, lungs drawing air with quiet strength. Nathaniel knelt, hat in hand. She slipped her fingers into his beard, testing, trusting. You still thinking of ranch work, mister? He smiled, voice rough. Only if you'll help mend fences. The nun's quill scratched final signatures on adoption papers. Distant church bells told evening mass, though to Nathaniel they rang like a starting gun. Beyond the adobe walls stretched a horizon unscarred by past sins, waiting to test their newfound breaths. He lifted Emma onto the saddle of a borrowed mare, climbed up behind her, and together they turned toward the high desert where thunderstorms rolled and children were never again sold to the highest bidder. Late summer rippled across the high desert as Nathaniel and Emma followed a wagon-rutted trail toward the Double B, the ranch he once worked alone but now imagined alive with the echo of her smaller footsteps. The sunset poured copper over distant buttes and dust swirled behind the mare's hooves, yet peace felt as fragile as the glass harmonicas the peddlers sold in Santa Fe. News traveled faster than hoofbeats, and by the time they reached the home paddock, a telegram awaited on the porch rail, its wire code flicking like a snake's tongue. Pike escaped during transfer, believed en route north, caution advised. Nathaniel folded the message, eyes scanning the sagebrush horizon where twilight pooled in indigo hollows. Emma saw the shadow cross his face and asked no questions. She simply slipped her hand into his, and the weight of that small gesture braced him better than any Colt in the house gun rack. Days settled into a rhythm that felt almost borrowed from another lifetime. Emma fed hens and read primer lessons aloud beneath the cottonwood, while Nathaniel mended fences and taught her to whistle two-note commands the cattle dogs obeyed. Each dusk they sat on the porch with cups of chicory and watched bats stitch the sky, yet Nathaniel's gaze often drifted to the distant rise of the old Comanche Trail, waiting for dust he hoped would never appear. He started sleeping with boots on, Winchester propped against the window, but confided none of it to the girl whose lungs now drew air with steady resolve. The stillness splintered one market day in Las Rutas when Nathaniel rode in for seed grain. A stage clattered past bearing a familiar gray-habited silhouette. Sister Magdalene leaned out and gestured him over. Her voice, usually calm as chapel stone, quivered against the rattle of wheels. Marshal Griffin had traced Pike's flight to a mining syndicate in Colorado Territory, men who financed the raffle scheme and now sought to erase every loose thread, including the child who had lived to tell. Griffin wanted Emma in the capital for sworn testimony before a federal circuit judge arrived next month, and he wanted Nathaniel deputized for her protection on the journey. The nun pressed a tarnished badge into his palm, eyes fierce. For a breath he felt the old void of doubt yawning wide, but Emma's laughter floated from the feed store doorway, and the badge suddenly fit like a promise. They left before dawn 2 days later, Sister Magdalene driving a weather-worn buckboard, the marshal riding flank, Emma wrapped in a Navajo blanket against chill. The route followed the Atchison rail spur for speed, yet avoided depot towns where rumor could sprout like cheatgrass. Still, on the third night at an abandoned relay station, a coyote chorus broke into frantic silence moments before pistol shots cracked the darkness. Shadows flitted beyond the corral. One muzzle flash lit Pike's unmistakable silhouette, hat brim gone but mustache intact, grin white as bone. The gunfight that followed was brief and brutal. Griffin dropped one rider, Nathaniel winged another from the barn loft, but Pike slipped away in the confusion, leaving boot tracks that vanished into volcanic gravel. Emma, crouched beneath the wagon, did not scream. She wrapped arms around her knees and breathed slow, the way the Santa Fe doctor had taught. When Nathaniel found her afterward, she whispered only one word, "Still?" and he answered with a squeeze that tried to be assurance, yet trembled with fear he could not mask. 2 nights later they reached the territorial capital under a curtain of rain that turned adobe streets into russet slurry. Judge Carleton's temporary courtroom occupied the governor's reception hall, candelabras casting jittery halos over oak paneling shipped at ruinous cost from St. Louis. Emma climbed the witness stand with timid but steady resolve. Her testimony, delivered in clear breaths and plain language, painted Redemption Creek in cruel relief. The smoky haze, the ticket bucket, the squeeze of Pike's fingers on her shoulder while bids rose like summer flies. The gallery sat in pin-drop silence until a defense attorney tried to rattle her by suggesting she misremembered under laudanum haze. Emma drew herself taller and answered that her memory was sharper than ever because every breath had been counted like coin. Even the judge's gavel seemed humbled. Verdict was due at sundown, but fate seldom waits on legal formalities. Pike, shackled in a back room, produced a pawnshop hacksaw, testimony to corrupt reach. By the time a guard's scream echoed across the courtyard, Pike was gone into a maze of rain-slick alleys. Nathaniel and Griffin gave chase, boots hammering adobe puddles, lantern light skittering across walls plastered with wanted sheets. They cornered him behind the old tannery where steam vents wheezed like infernal lungs. Pike swung a broken bottle, eyes wild with righteous grievance. Nathaniel stepped forward, Winchester leveled, pulse ringing in his ears with the memory of stillborn hopes, raffle tickets, and a child's stifled gasp. Pike sneered, said that silver buys more judges than bullets ever could, and lunged. The gunshot that answered was almost gentle, a single exhalation of powder that sent the bottle spinning useless through steam. Pike staggered, clutching his side, disbelief blooming crimson across his waistcoat. He slumped against a brick wall blackened by years of hide-boiling fires, the stench of old lie rising like judgment. Marshal Griffin pressed irons on fresh wounds, boots splashing as rain renewed, washing red into the gutter where it swirled away toward the river beyond town. The trial concluded without its defendant. Sentencing came swift under military guard. Emma never saw Pike again, though sometimes at dusk her gaze wandered west as if tracking ghosts in the dust haze. Nathaniel noticed and began telling her stories of the land at that hour instead. How the sun glancing off gypsum made hills look snow-kissed, how coyotes sang to teach pups the shape of distance. In those stories Pike had no place to hide, and little by little the habit of glancing over shoulders ebbed like the last chord of a church hymn. Autumn deepened. Leaves rusted to ochre and gold along the Santa Fe River, and the adoption decree, now embossed with the territorial seal, traveled back to Redemption Creek by rail in a walnut-framed Sister Magdalene insisted be hung above the ranch hearth. Emma read the calligraphy aloud the first evening it caught firelight. Her voice, once whistling, now rang bell-clear. Outside, an early frost silvered the corral fences, each slat gleaming in moonlight like new beginnings hammered into shape. Winter came with hard winds and nights so cold the water trough skinned over before dawn. Emma woke once coughing on icy air, but Nathaniel had already banked the stove and strung quilts over windows, and the spell passed before the rooster's crow. Spring, when it arrived, felt earned. Wild iris sprinkled the prairie and calves bellowed under wide blue sky. Emma rode fence line on a sturdy paint pony Nathaniel bought at auction, teaching herself to post in the saddle with the same grit that once counted every breath. When she lost balance and tumbled, she bounced up laughing, dusting off skirts and demanding another go. One evening, months after the trial, a letter arrived from Sister Magdalene. The judge's inquiry had expanded across 3 states, shuttering raffles, orphan brothels, and a silver smelting cartel whose ledgers matched the one Nathaniel recovered in Galena's Canyon. The nun wrote that children saved by the raid sent drawings to Emma, penciled doves, sunbursts, and wide-brimmed hats labeled Mr. Brooks. Emma pinned them above her bed alongside pressed desert flowers, the gallery of a life reclaimed. Sometimes, in the hush before dawn, Nathaniel remembered the stranger on Redemption Creek's dusty street, blood pooling beneath a telegram, and wondered if the man's spirit rode the wind that teased the cottonwood leaves outside Emma's window. At such moments he would step onto the porch, breath frosting in moonlight, and thank whoever listened that a single raffle ticket, purchased not in hope but in grim necessity, had redrawn the map of 2 lost souls. And far out across the dark prairie a coyote would answer, its lonesome cry curling over the sage, then fade into quiet so pure it seemed the world was pausing between heartbeats, waiting to see what these 2 would make of the dawn just starting to blush along the edge of the hills.